The first mistake the Varkuun Empire made was putting an old man on every screen in the galaxy and assuming humanity would look away. His name was Tovan Rell, and he did not look like a threat to anything larger than a stubborn door. He was 73 Earth years by the Terran conversion tables, thin as a rail, wrapped in a gray prison coat that hung from his shoulders like it had given up before he did. His hands were bound in front of him, not because he could escape, but because empires enjoy theater. I know because I was there, standing 12 feet from the platform, holding a security tablet and trying not to laugh at the absurdity of it. One old dock worker, one retired fuel clerk from the outer moon of Kesh, one forgotten alien with cloudy eyes and a limp in his left leg. And somehow, according to Lord Kuran, he had committed treason against an empire that owned 6-star systems, 400 warships, and enough arrogance to warm a small planet. The charge was read in 3 languages, then translated into 57 more for the broadcast. Aid to a human combatant. Shelter of an enemy survivor. Refusal to report contact with Earth military personnel. The crowd loved that part. They hissed and clicked and stamped their feet against the white stone plaza, because nothing makes loyal citizens feel brave like watching a powerless man be blamed for kindness. Tovan did not argue. That bothered me more than I expected. Most prisoners begged. Some cursed. A few tried speeches about justice, which always sounded dramatic until the microphones cut off. Tovan only stared past the cameras toward the red morning sky of Varkuun Prime, as if he were trying to remember a quieter place. Lord Kuran stepped beside him in ceremonial armor polished so brightly it reflected the crowd in warped silver streaks. He was 9 feet tall, broad as a shuttle door, with the kind of voice that made lesser officers straighten before they understood why. He raised one clawed hand, and the plaza went silent. Citizens of the Empire, he said, let this be remembered. Mercy toward humans is betrayal. Compassion toward Earth is contamination. The crowd cheered. I joined them half a second late, because my eyes were still on Tovan. The old man blinked once. That was all. Kuran turned toward him, almost smiling. You gave water to a wounded human soldier 14 years ago. You hid him from Imperial patrols. You helped him return to his people. For what reward? Tovan's mouth moved slowly, like every word cost him. No reward. Kuran leaned closer. Then why? The plaza waited. The galaxy waited. The old man lifted his head, and for the first time, his voice carried clearly through the speakers. I only gave him water. There was laughter then. Loud, ugly, relieved laughter. Even I smiled, because it sounded so small. Water. A cup of water for one dying human in the dust of a crashed battlefield. That was the grand crime. That was the terrible secret. That was the favor the Empire had dragged into daylight. Then a junior officer beside me frowned at his tablet. A priority signal had appeared on every open channel in the system. No sender name. No fleet marker. No diplomatic seal. Just 3 words in plain Terran English, burned across the screen so cleanly that even our translators hesitated before speaking them aloud. Humanity remembers. 14 years earlier, Tovenrell had not been a hero, and that was the part the Empire never understood. Heroes stood tall in memorial halls. Heroes had medals, statues, and songs written by people who had never been cold, hungry, or afraid. Tovan had been a fuel clerk on Kesh Minor, a dusty supply moon with 2 landing fields, 1 broken weather tower, and winds strong enough to peel paint from a cargo hauler. His job was simple. Count fuel cells. Log deliveries. Keep his head down when Imperial patrols came through looking for smugglers, rebels, or anyone poor enough to be convenient. Then the human fell from the sky. Not dramatically. Not like the old war reels with burning cruisers and glorious last stands. His escape pod punched through the upper storm layer at 3 in the morning and hit the salt flats 27 miles outside the depot, hard enough to wake every proximity alarm in Tovan's shack. Tovan should have reported it. That was the law. Unknown craft. Military debris. Possible enemy survivor. Report immediately and wait for armed retrieval. Instead, he took an old ground rover, 2 water cans, and a medical kit that had expired before most of his grandchildren were born. He told himself he was only checking the wreckage. He told himself any decent citizen would confirm whether there was a hazard. He told himself many things on that drive, because fear has a way of sounding like logic when you are alone in the dark. The pod was cracked open when he found it, half buried in white dust beneath a ridge of black stone. Inside was a human male in a torn flight suit, breathing like every breath had to be negotiated. Tovan had seen humans on propaganda screens before. Loud, reckless, dangerous, impossible to reason with. That was what the Empire said. This one looked barely old enough to rent a car by American standards, maybe 25, with sand in his hair and one hand still gripping a useless locator beacon. When Tovan stepped closer, the human opened his eyes. They were gray, sharp even through exhaustion. "Do not worry," the human said in a cracked voice. "I am too tired to be impressive. That should not have been funny." Tovan laughed anyway, one short sound that startled them both. "What is your name?" Tovan asked. "Daniel Hayes," the human said. "Lieutenant, Terran Navy." Then he looked past Tovan toward the empty horizon. "Are they coming?" Tovan knew who he meant. Imperial patrols. Search drones. Men who treated mercy like a paperwork error. "Yes," Tovan said. Daniel nodded once, as if that answered everything. "Then you should leave." That was when Tovan made the decision that would ruin his quiet life, and, many years later, shake the throne of Varkuun Prime. He held the water can to Daniel's mouth and said, "Drink first." Daniel stared at him like he had just heard a prayer in a language he had forgotten. He drank carefully, slowly, not wasting a drop. After that, Tovan dragged him out of the pod, hid him beneath thermal blankets in the rover's storage bay, and drove straight through the storm instead of taking the marked road. Twice, patrol lights crossed the flats behind them. Twice, Daniel tried to sit up and help. Twice, Tovan pushed him back down and told him, very firmly, that humans were apparently terrible at staying rescued. By sunrise, they reached an abandoned mining shelter carved into the southern cliffs. Tovan gave him food, a dry coat, and a short-range transmitter he had once used for illegal sports broadcasts. Daniel repaired it in less than 6 minutes using a bent tool, 2 copper strips, and an expression of mild annoyance. Tovan watched the device blink to life and finally understood something the Empire had missed. The human was not dangerous because he was angry. He was dangerous because even half-conscious, half-starved, and trapped on an enemy moon, his mind was still working. Before the Terran recovery shuttle arrived under cloud cover, Daniel stood in the shelter doorway, steadier now, taller than Tovan expected, with the storm turning gold behind him. "I owe you," he said. Tovan waved one thin hand. "You owe me nothing." It was water. Daniel's face changed then, not into rage, not into pride, but into something much quieter, much heavier. "Where I come from," he said, "water counts." Tovan smiled because he thought the human was being polite. He did not know Daniel Hayes would remember his name. He did not know Terran officers recorded debts the way other species recorded borders. He did not know that 1 cup of water had just placed him under the protection of the most stubborn species the galaxy would ever misjudge. By the time the broadcast returned to the plaza, Lord Kuran had already turned 1 cup of water into a public lesson. That was his gift, if you can call it a gift. He could take something small, decent, almost invisible, and twist it until an entire crowd believed it had been dangerous all along. The message on our tablets had lasted only 3 seconds before Imperial filters buried it under a wall of security warnings, but 3 seconds was enough. I saw officers glance at each other. I saw technicians suddenly remember other duties. I saw one communications aide whisper, very softly, that Terran English had no business appearing on a sealed Varkuun military channel. Kuran noticed all of it. Of course he did. Men like him lived on fear the way other species lived on oxygen. He stepped forward, armor shining beneath the morning sun, and raised both hands like a priest blessing a sermon he had written himself. "Citizens," he said, "you have just witnessed the final trick of a frightened species. A signal, a phrase, a little human drama." The crowd laughed, but not as loudly this time. "Good," Kuran continued. "Let them remember. Let every human from Earth to their scattered frontier colonies remember what happens when imperial law is challenged by sentiment." He turned slightly, making sure the cameras caught Tovan behind him. The old dock worker stood still, his coat pulling in the plaza wind, his face unreadable. Behind the platform, 2 guards brought forward 3 civilians from a holding transport. A middle-aged woman with silver streaks in her hair. A young man with fuel dust still on his sleeves. A little girl clutching a cloth starship in both hands. Tovan's family. The crowd went quiet in that strange way crowds do when entertainment becomes personal. Kuran smiled at the silence. Do you understand now? He asked the cameras. This is not cruelty. This is hygiene. Kindness toward humans spreads. It infects judgment. It weakens borders. One old man hides one enemy pilot, and 14 years later, Earth thinks it can speak into our sky. He paced along the platform, every step slow, every word polished smooth. The Empire does not punish compassion. It punishes contamination disguised as compassion. That line earned applause from the front rows, mostly party officials and military families who knew when to clap. Farther back, the sound thinned out. Even loyal citizens could count. 1 cup of water. For prisoners. A fleet commander making speeches at sunrise. Something did not balance. I checked my tablet again. The Terran signal was gone, but the system logs showed something impossible. It had not come from outside the network. It had passed through 12 encrypted relays, crossed the palace firewall, and appeared from an internal emergency channel reserved for Imperial succession events. That meant either our security was a joke, which nobody was allowed to say, or humanity had been inside our systems long before Tovan ever stepped onto the platform. I looked up at Kuran, suddenly aware that his smile was not confidence. It was performance. He was not speaking to the crowd anymore. He was speaking to whoever had sent those 3 words. Then he made the mistake that would follow him into every history archive that survived him. He faced the main camera, lowered his voice, and said, Daniel Hayes, if you are watching, your friend belongs to Varkuun law now. Your debt is meaningless here. The plaza speakers carried his words across the city, across the system, across every relay the Empire controlled. For 2 full seconds, nothing happened. Then every screen in the square flickered once. Not enough to shut down. Not enough to panic the crowd. Just enough to show that someone else had placed a finger on the Empire's throat and was deciding how hard to press. The reply did not come as a speech, and that was the first thing that made my stomach drop. Speeches were normal. Speeches meant pride, anger, politics, the usual civilized nonsense species used before making terrible decisions. What appeared on every screen across Varkuun Prime was only a room. A quiet room. White walls. A steel table. One American flag in the corner, not waving, not burning, not dramatic, just standing there like it had been waiting all morning. At the table sat Daniel Hayes. I had read his file an hour earlier, or what the Empire claimed was his file. Former Terran Navy lieutenant. Border war survivor. Strategic advisor. Retired. 59 Earth years old. 6 feet 1 inch. No active command authority. No current fleet assignment. Low political relevance. That last line aged badly before I finished reading it. Daniel did not look like a legend. He wore a dark jacket over a plain shirt. No medals. No armor. No weapon visible. His hair had gone silver at the temples. His face was lined in the way human faces get when time keeps trying to sand them down and somehow only makes them sharper. There were officers behind him, but they were not interrupting. That mattered. On Varkuun Prime, powerful people filled silence because they feared what might enter it. Daniel Hayes let silence sit beside him like an old friend. He looked into the camera, and the plaza went so quiet I could hear the wind dragging dust across the stone. Lord Kuran lifted his chin, trying to smile as if he had expected this. Mr. Hayes, he said, projecting his voice toward the nearest camera, you are addressing an imperial legal proceeding. Daniel did not answer him. He looked past Kuran, past the guards, past all of us, directly at Tovenrell. The old dockworker stared back, confused at first, then slowly, impossibly, relieved. Daniel placed both hands flat on the table. Tovan, he said, I am sorry I am late. No one laughed. Not one citizen. Not one soldier. Not even the officers paid to look fearless. Kuran stepped forward, the performance cracking at the edges. You have no authority here. Your government has not declared intervention. Your fleet is not within range. Your nearest military corridor is over 11 light years away. Daniel blinked once. That was his entire reaction. Then he turned his head slightly to someone off-screen and said 3 words. Call the fleet. Behind him, every officer moved at once. Not in panic. Not in confusion. In recognition. Like a bell had rung that only humans had been trained to hear. My tablet began screaming with alerts. Civilian traffic freeze. Military channel override. Long-range sensor blackout. Relay lockout from Kesh Minor to the inner moons. The Empire had spent 2 centuries building a communications web so secure that even our allies hated using it. Humanity stepped into it like they had been given a guest password. Kuran saw the alerts too. His jaw tightened. "Empty theater," he said. Daniel finally looked at him. "No, Lord Kuran. Theater is what you built this morning. This is accounting." It was such a human sentence. Small words. Calm voice. No poetry. No threat wrapped in ancient prophecy. Just accounting. As if fleets, governments, and trembling star systems were numbers in a ledger, and Varkuun had entered the wrong debt under the wrong name. Then a second message appeared across the screens, clean and simple. Release Tovenrell and his family. Transfer Lord Kuran to neutral custody. Issue a public apology to all protected civilian worlds. You have 6 hours. The crowd stared upward, reading it again and again, because 6 hours felt too short for diplomacy and too long for a bluff. Kuran raised his hand to cut the feed. The screens ignored him. He ordered the military band to play. The speakers ignored him too. For the first time in my service, I watched the Empire give a command and receive no obedience from its own machines. Daniel Hayes leaned closer to the camera, not angry, not loud, not begging. 6 hours, he said. Then the feed ended, and every clock on Varkuun Prime changed at the same time. The first team sent to silence Daniel Hayes lost contact before their boots finished crossing the hallway floor. Lord Kuran did not announce the order, of course. Men like him call panic strategy when the room is important enough. He stepped away from the plaza cameras, entered the armored command lift beneath the courthouse, and told his private operations chief to remove the human problem before the 4th hour. Not arrest, not negotiate, remove. The operations chief bowed like this was routine, because the Varkuun Empire had always believed there was no problem a quiet team in black armor could not solve. They chose 6 specialists from the Palace Shadow Guard, all veterans, all enhanced for silent movement, all equipped with non-reflective armor, pulse suppressors, neural cuffs, and the confidence of people who had never been asked to fight an old American who had already survived worse days than this one. Their transport slipped through low orbit under a stolen civilian signature, then dropped into the Terran diplomatic station sitting above the neutral moon of Caldera. According to our intelligence reports, Daniel Hayes was still inside the White Room where he had delivered the ultimatum. No active guards within 30 feet. No visible defensive grid. No emergency evacuation trail. It looked careless. That should have bothered us. It did not. The first shadow guard cut the service panel beside the outer hatch and froze. Not because of an alarm. Because the panel opened too easily. Inside, every wire had been labeled in clean Terran handwriting. Door. Lights. Camera. Please stop touching. This. He stared at the last sentence for half a second too long. The lights in the corridor turned blue. Not red. Not warning amber. Blue. As if the station was politely changing moods. Then a voice came over the speaker, calm and American and almost bored. "Gentlemen, you are early." Daniel Hayes stepped into the corridor without armor. Same dark jacket. Same plain shirt. One ceramic mug in his right hand, steam rising from it like he had been interrupted during breakfast. The lead shadow guard raised his suppressor. Daniel looked at the weapon, then at the man holding it. "You brought palace gear into a neutral station," he said. "That is either brave or deeply underfunded." The guard fired. The suppressor made no sound. The shot never reached him. A transparent security field flashed once, swallowed the pulse, and vanished before the steam from Daniel's mug had even curled sideways. For one beautiful, terrible second, nobody moved. Then the humans did. They came from places no sensible species would hide. Maintenance shafts, ceiling grips, a cleaning bay labeled supplies. 2 Marines dropped behind the invaders with soft boots and softer hands, taking weapons away so smoothly it looked rehearsed because it was. One shadow guard lunged toward Daniel. Daniel turned his shoulder, caught the alien's wrist, stepped aside, and guided him into the wall with the careful disappointment of a man correcting a bad golf swing. Another tried to activate a comm beacon. A young human woman in a station mechanic jacket tapped his gauntlet with a wrench, and the device chirped, rebooted, and displayed a cartoon turtle. The entire fight lasted 19 seconds. No shouting, no dramatic music, no heroic pose. Just 6 Imperial specialists sitting on the floor, restrained, embarrassed, and very much alive, while Daniel finally took a sip from his mug. He looked at the station camera, knowing Kuran would be watching through stolen access or pride or both. Then he crouched beside the lead guard and placed a small recorder in the alien's palm. "Tell your emperor," Daniel said. "I remember." Back on Varkuun Prime, the fourth hour had not even begun, but the crowd had already changed. They were no longer asking whether humanity would come. They were asking how much of the Empire had already been surrounded. At the beginning of the fifth hour, Lord Kuran stopped pretending the countdown was a joke. He moved the prisoners from the public platform into the lower palace bunker, which was supposed to reassure the citizens, but did exactly the opposite. People notice when tyrants hide underground. The plaza remained packed because nobody wanted to be the first to leave and nobody wanted to stay. Above us, the sky was wrong. Varkuun Prime had 2 pale moons and a ring of orbital defense mirrors that usually glittered like a crown at noon. Now half the mirrors had gone dark, one by one, not destroyed, not smoking, just dark, like someone had politely flipped the Empire off at the power box. Military command called it a calibration error. Then the North Battery stopped answering. Then the Southern Relay Grid began broadcasting children's weather reports from Nebraska. I did not know what Nebraska was, but the human voice describing mild afternoon winds across the Great Plains somehow sounded more threatening than our war sirens. Kuran ordered the first home fleet into high orbit, all 120 capital ships, their hulls black and gold, their plasma veins bright enough to turn the clouds orange. That was supposed to restore confidence. It did, for about 30 seconds. Then the Terran response appeared on civilian navigation screens before our own military sensors saw it. Not ships. Not yet. Just empty zones. 37 perfect spheres of forbidden space around every Varkuun fleet asset, every weapons depot, every command relay, all marked in calm blue with one sentence beneath them. "Please remain clear for your safety." The arrogance of that sentence nearly caused a riot in the command bunker. Kuran slammed his fist onto the tactical table hard enough to crack the glass. "Safety," he snarled. "They threaten us and call it safety." No one answered, because the table updated again. A Varkuun patrol wing near the outer moon had attempted to intercept a small Terran medical shuttle carrying neutral observers away from the system. 4. Imperial fighters closed on it, proud and fast, their pilots broadcasting insults over open channels. The shuttle did not change course. It did not accelerate. It sent one message. "You are approaching a protected humanitarian vessel. Adjust heading." The fighters laughed. I heard the recording later. I wish I had not. Not because it was frightening, because it was embarrassing. The first fighter locked weapons. Before it could fire, something moved between the moon and the stars. A Terran escort drone, no larger than a pickup truck, unfolded from black space and painted the fighter with a blue targeting beam. Then another drone appeared. Then 8 more. The Imperial pilots tried to break formation. The drones did not chase them like predators. They herded them like misbehaving dogs. One fighter lost engine control and drifted safely into a capture net. Another had its weapons systems shut down so completely that its cockpit lights switched to emergency reading mode. The third pilot surrendered before anyone asked. The fourth kept shouting until a human voice cut into the channel and said, "Sir, your microphone is still on." That was the moment the bunker changed. Not because we had lost 4 fighters. Empires lose fighters all the time. It changed because humanity had won a fight without making it look difficult. Kuran demanded a full fleet engagement. His admirals hesitated. That hesitation was new. It spread through the room faster than any alarm. On the central screen, Daniel Hayes appeared again, this time standing on the bridge of a Terran command ship that our sensors still insisted did not exist. He looked tired, not afraid. Behind him, officers moved with quiet precision, passing numbers, confirming lanes, drawing the Empire apart with mathematics. Daniel checked something on a tablet, then looked up. "Lord Kuran," he said, "you have 1 hour left. Return Tovenrell and his family. The offer has not changed." Kuran leaned toward the screen, voice low. "And if I refuse?" Daniel's expression did not move. "Then we stop asking through speakers." The final hour began with silence, which was rude of it. We expected sirens. We expected marching orders. We expected Lord Kuran to stand before the Empire and roar until everyone remembered how to be afraid of him instead of the humans. Instead, He locked himself in the lower command vault with 12 admirals, 6 legal ministers, 3 propaganda directors, and 1 very nervous communications clerk who kept glancing at the countdown like it owed him money. Tovenrell and his family were held in a secure chamber 2 levels above us, watched by guards who suddenly looked less like predators and more like employees hoping their shift ended before history arrived. The old man asked for a chair. Nobody answered. Then his granddaughter offered him her cloth starship, and he held it with both hands like it was an anchor. That tiny gesture somehow frightened me more than the fleet reports. Fear is strange that way. It does not always enter through explosions. Sometimes it enters through a child trusting someone old to keep the world from falling apart. At 38 minutes remaining, Kuran made his choice. He did not call it refusal. He called it a strategic proof of sovereignty, which is what powerful fools say when they are about to touch the glowing wire. A Terran relief vessel had entered the outer traffic lane under neutral markings, carrying medical supplies, journalists, and observers from 5 independent worlds. It was slow, white, and shaped like a rounded brick. No escort visible. No weapons visible. It broadcast its route every 12 seconds in 300 languages. Kuran pointed at it on the tactical table. Fire across its bow. The admirals went still. One of them, old enough to have survived 3 border wars and therefore allergic to stupidity, said, "My lord, that ship is protected under neutral corridor law." Kuran did not look at him. Then aimed carefully. That was the order. That was the moment the Empire stopped walking toward disaster and started sprinting. High above the planet, the flagship Dominion Spear turned its forward battery toward the little Terran vessel. The shot was meant to pass close, a warning, a public insult dressed as military discipline. Our cameras tracked it beautifully. A bright Imperial lance streaked through space toward the relief ship, and for half a heartbeat every officer in the vault looked pleased to finally see Varkuun technology do something human machines had not already embarrassed. Then the lance bent. Not stopped. Not blocked. Bent. It curved away from the relief vessel as if space itself had politely disagreed with the weapon. The beam folded into a harmless arc and vanished beyond the moon. Nobody spoke. The tactical table refreshed. The empty zones around our fleet changed from blue to white, then from white to red. A new Terran message appeared. Hostile action confirmed. Protective intervention authorized. Kuran shouted for full sensor sweep. The answer came back impossible. There were no Terran capital ships in front of us. None behind the relief vessel. None above the orbital plane. Then the moon shadows opened. That is the only way I can describe it. Darkness peeled back from places our maps had labeled empty, and human carriers emerged so close to our defensive ring that one Varkuun officer whispered, they were already inside. Not one ship. Not 10. Dozens. Wide, dark, silent vessels with no decorative banners, no roaring engines, no imperial gold. Just working steel and the ugly confidence of tools made by people who cared more about results than beauty. Their drones spread first, neat as migrating birds, each one taking position beside a Varkuun weapon platform. Then the platforms went quiet. Not destroyed. Not shattered. Quiet. One by one, the Empire's proud guns lowered like ashamed heads. On the bridge feed, Daniel Hayes watched the display without smiling. Someone behind him said, "Civilian lanes secure. Medical vessel clear. All enemy batteries contained." Daniel nodded once. Begin Phase 2. Across Varkuun Prime, the palace lights flickered. The bunker doors sealed. The countdown reached 29 minutes. And for the first time in my life, I understood that the humans had not arrived to start a war. They had arrived to end our ability to continue on. Phase 2 did not begin with missiles. It began with doors opening where no doors should have existed. The lower palace had been designed by engineers who believed concrete, steel, and arrogance were the same thing. Its walls were layered with shield mesh, pressure locks, biometric gates, and enough hidden corridors to make any rebellion feel like a maze with bad funding. The humans bypassed all of it in 12 minutes. Not because they were stronger than the building, though they were. Not because they had better tools, though they definitely did. They bypassed it because 14 years earlier, Tovenrell had worked fuel logistics for the outer moon depots, and fuel clerks know where every emergency tunnel is, because fuel clerks are always the first people blamed when something catches fire. Before his arrest, Tovan had sent one old maintenance map to a dead message account, probably expecting no one to read it. Daniel Hayes had read it. Of course he had. At 23 minutes remaining, a cleaning lift behind the prisoner wing chimed politely, opened, and released 8 Terran Marines in matte gray armor with blue medical markers on their sleeves. That detail confused us. Medical markers meant rescue protocol, not assault protocol. It took me too long to understand that humans did not separate the two when civilians were involved. The first guard raised his weapon. A Marine pointed at him and said, "Sit down." The guard sat. I wish I could make that sound dramatic, but it was mostly embarrassing. The second guard tried to call command, and his communicator displayed a weather forecast for Kansas City. The third looked at Tovan's granddaughter, looked at the humans, and quietly stepped aside. Smartest man in the hallway. Daniel Hayes came last. No helmet, no ceremonial armor, just a compact field vest over his jacket, a sidearm sealed at his hip, and the same tired expression he had worn on the screen. He looked like a father arriving late to a school meeting, except every person around him moved as if his silence outranked gravity. Tovan stood when he saw him. For 1 second, the old dock worker was back on Kesh Minor, staring at a wounded young pilot who should have died in the salt flats. Daniel stopped 6 feet away. "You got old," Tovan said. Daniel looked at the gray coat, the restraints, the frightened family behind him, and nodded. "You started it." Tovan laughed. It was small, cracked, and completely out of place in a bunker under siege. That laugh did something no fleet had managed yet. It broke the room. The guards stopped pretending this was normal. The civilians started crying softly. Even my own hands shook around the tablet. Then the ceiling speakers snapped on, and Kuran's voice filled the chamber. "Hayes, step away from the prisoners, or the palace security grid will activate." Daniel looked up at the nearest camera. "Lord Kuran," he said, "your palace security grid has been sending us error reports for 19 minutes. There was a pause. A beautiful pause. The kind that belongs in museums. Then every locked door in the corridor opened at once. Terran teams moved through the palace like a storm that had studied the floor plan. They did not chase servants. They did not frighten children. They did not damage the ancient murals Kuran loved to stand in front of during speeches. They simply took away command rooms, communications nodes, weapon controls, and escape routes, one calm step at a time. In the central vault, Kuran ordered his elite guard to intercept Daniel. They met him outside the east stairwell. I watched on a security feed as the largest of them blocked the passage, towering over Daniel by nearly 3 feet. The alien lowered his heavy shield and growled something about imperial authority. Daniel glanced at the shield, then at the stairs behind him, then back at the guard. "I am trying to return an old man to his family," he said. "Please do not make this awkward." The guard moved. The humans moved faster. No chaos. No cruel spectacle. Just clean footwork, controlled hands, and a sudden understanding that size is not the same as control. 10 seconds later, the passage was clear, and every guard was seated, restrained, and blinking at the ceiling as if physics had betrayed them personally. Daniel did not look back. He walked Tovan and his family through the open palace doors, across the same white plaza where the Empire had tried to make kindness look weak. Above them, the proud Varkuun fleet hung silent in the sky, every weapon dark, every engine locked, every captain waiting for permission from humans who had not even raised their voices. Lord Kuran surrendered 9 minutes before the countdown ended, which told us everything we needed to know about courage when it runs out of audience. He did not step into the plaza like a warrior. He did not bring banners, drums, or one of those speeches he loved so much. He came through the palace doors with his hands open, his armor unpowered, and 2 Terran Marines walking behind him at a respectful distance that somehow made it worse. The crowd did not cheer. The crowd did not hiss. The crowd watched him cross the white stone in silence, because all morning he had told them the Empire was eternal, and now eternity looked very tired. Tovenrell stood beside Daniel Hayes near the center of the plaza, wrapped in a clean emergency blanket that one of the human medics had placed over his shoulders. His family stood close to him. His granddaughter still held the cloth starship, though now she kept looking up at the real ones in the sky, the dark human carriers hanging above Varkuun Prime like patient mountains. Every Varkuun weapon remained locked. Every command channel remained under Terran control. Every admiral in orbit had received the same instruction from the humans: hold position and keep civilians safe. That last part confused more people than the fleet did. We understood conquest. We understood revenge. We understood punishment. We did not understand a species powerful enough to take our capital in an afternoon and disciplined enough to avoid frightening a street vendor. Kuran stopped 10 feet from Daniel and forced his voice to carry. The Varkuun Empire accepts temporary neutral custody while formal terms are discussed. Daniel looked at him for a long second. No, he said. You accept responsibility. It was not loud. It did not need to be. Behind him, every screen across the plaza activated again, not with Terran flags or victory music, but with records, orders, transcripts, arrest warrants, the false charges against Tovan, the secret command to seize his family, the attack order against the relief vessel. Kuran's own voice played back in perfect clarity, stripped of ceremony and surrounded by facts. That was the human blade I had not expected. Not firepower, not stealth carriers. Documentation. They did not only beat us. They brought receipts. The neutral observers confirmed everything within minutes. By sunset, the Imperial Council had removed Kuran from command. By midnight, the outer colonies began voting on emergency separation. By morning, every government within 12 light years had sent Earth the same question in different languages. What does humanity consider a protected debt? Daniel gave the answer in the plaza, standing beside an old dockworker who had once chosen mercy over fear. He faced the cameras and said, if someone helps one of ours when they are alone, hungry, injured, or hunted, we remember. If someone punishes them for that help, we come. That is all. Tovan looked embarrassed by the attention. He leaned toward Daniel and whispered something the microphones barely caught. It was only water. Daniel turned to him, and for the first time all day, he smiled. Where I come from, that is enough. Years later, when children studied the fall of Kuran's government, teachers argued over strategy, supply lines, cyber warfare, and orbital control. Soldiers argued over the quiet precision of the Terran fleet. Politicians argued over law. But ordinary people remembered the simple version. An old alien gave a dying human water. 14 years later, the sky filled with human ships. That was when the galaxy finally understood the part we had mistaken for weakness. Humans are not loyal because they are soft. They are loyal because somewhere deep inside them, carved below language and law, they believe kindness creates family. And once you become family to mankind, even worlds can shake when someone tries to take you away.